Hi everyone, it's Leah here and welcome to today's video. I'm just going to check this is properly plugged in. It looks like it is. Um, I wanted to talk today about the positives of having ADHD. I've done a blog post about this which will be published shortly, and I just wanted to kind of talk around about that. But actually, I'm going to change the direction I'm taking with this just slightly, because I'm a member of a few ADHD Facebook groups, and earlier this week I saw a post that somebody had posted in one of them. It was a gentleman, a guy, who had basically said in his post, I can't remember the exact words, but something along the lines of, it really upsets me and annoys me when I see people saying ADHD is a superpower. I feel like there's nothing good about it, and it's made my life awful. It's made my life much harder. And at first, the kind of positive therapist in me, and also the person who's got Make ADHD Your Superpower written on the front page of their website, kind of resisted that comment at first, and wanted to kind of fix it in some way, wanted to kind of go back in and say, well, this is how you change how you think about it. But actually, when I really thought about it, it's true. It does make life harder. And when we think of superheroes and superpowers, we tend to, I think of it being only good. Um, but actually, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Hancock with Will Smith, who just hated his superpowers, hated the fact that, he could do all these things and he had these kind of things going on. He just wanted to be normal. He just wanted to kind of get on with his day without all this kind of stuff going on in the background. Or thinking of, I've forgotten what she's called, but the one where you can't touch her, because she's just too powerful, so she couldn't have any connections with people around her. And so when we're talking about a superpower, we're not necessarily talking about the fact that somebody is having something that's wholly positive. What we're saying is that somebody has something that's extraordinary, that's out of the norm, that's working potentially at a higher level than your average, than the norm. And one of the ways that Dr. Ned Hallowell, um, explains to his younger clients about ADHD is it's like having a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. And of course, if you were to have that for your car, then you'd be pretty fed up with your car because you'd be struggling to take control of it. Um, and so I can see why people would feel that way, but actually, there are some real positives to ADHD, which I'll get to. But um, when we have ADHD, really what's happening is our brain, well, there's a few things happening, but the way that our brain is set up is slightly different to somebody who doesn't have ADHD. And that means that the areas of executive function, and that means the bits of the brain that are kind of taking charge, they're like the conductor of the orchestra, or the teacher at the front of the class. They're there to make sure, those bits of the brain are there to make sure that all the information goes where it's needed to go, where all the unnecessary impulses are suppressed, so that we're not just kind of jumping out and saying whatever we want, or whatever comes to mind instantly. And of course, with ADHD, that's impaired, so that's exactly often what happens for people. um, I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, by I'm not sure if it's Professor or Dr. Dodson, but anyway, the guy that's really knowledgeable about RSD, and he was talking about how within the brain, the ADHD brain, what happens is that it's a bit like a rocket launch. So in the brain's always firing off rockets, and the way that the brain kind of um, controls things is that it inhibits the unnecessary things. So actually, let me say this in a different way. So the example he gave that was actually more helpful was when you're first learning to reach out, as you know, as a baby or toddler, you're reaching out to grab a cup. What you're not doing when you're learning to do that is you're not learning which movements you need to make. What your brain's actually doing is it's learning which movements it needs to inhibit. Okay, so when you're reaching out, actually what your brain's doing is it's inhibiting a lot of unnecessary movement so that all that remains is the movement that's helpful. So he likened that to a rocket launcher. So, ADHD brain is absolutely fantastic at launching the rocket, and in fact, probably launches more rockets than somebody who doesn't have ADHD, but actually, it's the guidance system that is faulty. So the rockets are not going where they need to go, and some of them shouldn't have launched in the first place. The guidance system should have kept them unlaunched, but they're launching anyway. And so when those kinds of things are having a real issue, um, when they're really disrupting your life and causing you a real issue. So whether you're being impulsive and you're making impulsive decisions, or you're, upsetting people because you're um, interrupting, or you're exploding in anger, or whether you are not able to hold down a job because you keep forgetting what you're supposed to do and getting distracted and your boss fires you, whatever it might be. Or like me, your house is a bit of a mess. I would never pan the camera because I'd be too worried about people seeing the chaos. Maybe I'll do that one day. Not brave enough to yet. Bit of encouragement, maybe give me a bit of encouragement, a few likes and subscribes, and maybe I'll go for that eventually. um so yeah, so whatever it is that's disrupting your life, um actually that can cause anxiety, cause you to worry a lot about it. And as I've talked about in my previous videos, that anxiety comes from basically a backlog rather of emotional thoughts that haven't been dealt with. um, and there's this cycle where ADHD causes you to have these difficulties, to have these frustrations in life that you're facing, and then the changes that happen through that kind of frustration, that anxiety, that stress, actually exacerbate the symptoms of ADHD. So where we've talked about executive function being limited in ADHD, actually when we become anxious and we suffer from anxiety, what happens is that the executive function is limited as well. So it worsens everything. What little um, executive function that you have actually is impacted even further. And then when we are really struggling in that way, our ADHD is worse. Then it's harder to see the positives. It's harder to see outside of that. So there's this kind of real vicious cycle um, that goes on. My daughter, this morning, I had a little chat with her about this video I was going to do today, and she has ADHD. She's not diagnosed, but I mean we're certain, and we will get that diagnosis at some point. And she knows it. Um, and so I said to her, so, what do you think about this then? This idea that ADHD has benefits, and actually for her, she finds that hard to see. She sees the difficult side of it more so, and she just gave me the most eloquent sort of description, analogy of how it feels to her. So she was saying it's like you are playing an Xbox game, and it's a two-person game. You've got it on the hardest level, and your friend hasn't turned up, so you've got both controllers and you're trying to kind of control both of the characters in the game. And and she kind of she's very animated, so she kind of went, oh, gosh, I'm doing this and I can't control him here. But actually she's right, that's exactly what it's like. And and it's like having all that going on whilst other people are, you know, just using the one controller, and, on the easy level. So, there is a lot more to manage, but those differences in the brain do have upsides. And I'm not going to go into it in massive length here because, I've detailed some of this stuff in the blog, but that that difference in the brain where these kind of calming, controlling, um, what's the word? When you get a child and you teach them how to behave in society, can't think of the word for that. Someone pop it in the comments for me. Um, that's what these parts of the brain are all about, though. They're all about kind of keeping you in check, keeping you to the rules, keeping you to the limitations, and making everything kind of much more linear and focused. And that's great, if you are sat in a classroom and you've got to behave in a certain way and you've got to take on the information in the exact way that the teacher is telling you it and reproduce it at the time of an exam or an essay or whatever. But actually, the ADHD brain struggles with that, and that's why we can face so many difficulties. But it struggles with it because we're not being limited in that same way. Our thoughts are much more fluid. They're much more kind of cross match, cross reference. We make linkages where other people might not. We're able to see a bigger picture rather than maybe getting bogged down in the way that things always have been. So people with ADHD tend to be big thinkers, tend to have a great sense of humor, tend to be able to think outside the box, to think of, sometimes crazy solutions to problems, to things that they're facing. And part of that may be because we grow up having to deal with all this extra stuff, having to play that computer game with, the two controllers. And maybe that's part of it. But most people with ADHD are great at these kinds of things. Everybody's slightly different, of course, but so the way that the brain isn't held into these kind of very structured, more rigid boxes allows a lot more flex, a lot more flexibility, a lot more ability to think in a different way. Another thing that's really great about the ADHD brain, something that's very different, is that because the ADHD brain is normally sort of fairly lacking in dopamine, what we find is that when adrenaline kicks in, the ADHD brain is able to kind of access more dopamine, which brings the focus level in. So where it's a bit like the stimulant, the stimulant medications. Okay, so it's somebody that doesn't have ADHD because their dopamine and everything else and noradrenaline are at a fairly good level already. If they take speed, amphetamine, they go up a notch. They become over. They have too much dopamine, and so they become over excitable, basically. So they become quite frazzled potentially. Whereas somebody who has lower levels of dopamine and noradrenaline, when we get stressed. So, in other words, when really big things happen, when huge demands and pressures are on us, in other words, when the poop hits the fan, generally what happens is the adrenaline picks up. And therefore the dopamine picks up and become better able to focus. I never understood why I can be so ditzy day to day, so kind of unable to focus and sometimes kind of emotional, and get really easily frazzled. And yet, when there's a true emergency, I'm the coolest person in the room. I'm the person that goes, right, what we're going to do is this. We don't need to worry about that. It's okay. I'll handle it. I'll handle it. Whereas you've got a slightly less stressful situation and I'm a mess. I'm all over the place. I'm, spiraling. I'm worrying about everything. So that hit of dopamine, that hit of adrenaline for somebody with ADHD actually brings them into their own. So where you've got jobs where you have to deal with emergencies, actually, or if you just happen to be an emergency, the ADHD brain can be amazing. So I'm going to leave it there, partly because I'm getting to the point where my words are turning into a big jumble. And that's because obviously, again, ADHD, it's hard work keeping focus. But I do want to say that just to end up a little bit of a sort of plug for my services. Number one, it doesn't matter if I don't understand your specific situation. Okay. I mean, I will always do my best to understand it and I will listen and we will talk about that at the assessment consultation. But if I don't entirely understand it, if I can't get my head around it, if I can't make sense of it, actually, it doesn't matter because the way that I work is all about you. So, in lots of ways, what I'm doing is I'm helping you get your brain working for you as best as you can. Um, so I act almost as like a catalyst, I guess. Um, so the hypnotherapy brings your brain into the um, best lineup, I guess, as it possibly can. So, in other words, it's about making you the best you can possibly be. And when your brain is functioning um, without being hindered by the negative influence of stress, of overwhelm, of anxiety, or if that is very much reduced, then your executive function will improve. And it absolutely will do. Um, and you'll find things easier to do. Whether that's learning um, new strategies. Um, you've probably all tried to learn strategies in the past, and it's like you think this is an amazing strategy. Yes, it's brilliant. I totally understand how that works. And then you go out into the wild and try and implement it, and it's just impossible to do because the brain is not um, able to kind of pick up on that. So it's about bringing you to the very best possible version of you. It's not about changing you. We won't be able to get rid of your ADHD. But actually, many people that I work with find that the ADHD symptoms that they find most troublesome um, tend to get reduced. Their overwhelm becomes reduced. Their emotional lability. So, in other words, instead of flying off the handle and getting really stressed about stuff, they're better able to cope and deal with the stuff and the people around them. Um, so if you want to know more about that, the first thing to do is to book in for an assessment consultation. Um, there's a booking link on the website, which is leahleaves.com. Hopefully my lovely tech people will have put that on the video there for you, and I'll try and put it into the comments below. And the assessment consultation is going to give us that opportunity to discuss specifically for you how I can help. And all my assessment consultations are covered by a money back guarantee, which means that if at the end of the session you don't actually want to work with me, in other words, you don't want to go ahead and actually have some sessions, um, my dog's snoring. I don't know if you could hear that on sound, but she's snoring away, bless her. Um, That's really funny. Yeah, so if you don't want to go ahead and work with me, then that's absolutely fine. You actually don't pay for the session. So you get a full refund for the session, no questions asked. So you only pay for it if you go ahead to work with me. So I would definitely encourage you to book in with me, and wherever you are in the world, it really doesn't matter. We can work over video call as long as you've got an internet connection and some kind of device like a computer or laptop, a computer or a tablet or a phone that you can connect to me with, then we can absolutely meet up at a time that works for you. So I've talked for way longer than I meant to. It's 2 minutes before my next call, and so I better get going and do that. So have a great rest of the day. And as always, if you've got any comments then or questions, please do dive in. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye.